question or the title is big. The kind of leadership that Africa needs in post COVID-19 COVID-19 world. It's a big question, or it's a big title. I will get to the topic directly. Starting with that, we as African, we think that we are the same. Because we are victims for the same problems, colonization, the biggest and the largest wave of colonization in the history of the world. We are victims for slavery, waves of slavery. We are victims for catastrophic and natural crises, things like that. We think that because we are victims for the same problems, we are the same, and the solution will be one solution or similar solution. And I'm challenging this idea. The leadership in Africa should be different from country to country. The focus should be totally different. Some African countries, the concept of government and the state is deep-rooted in their mind. In other African countries, the community is stronger than the government and the concept of the state. Some countries like Egypt, the government, the state is central and ancient. Ethiopia, the same. The government is central and ancient, with ancient kingdoms and ancient history, and put lines under central, because we are neighbor to the two countries, but the concept of government in Sudan is very weak among the Sudanese history. There is a nation, there is a country, but we have never had in our history a strong, powerful central government. We have different kingdoms and sheikdoms and alliance between them. This alliance is weak, sometimes collapse, sometimes appear. So the strong in Sudan is the community, the social fabric, not the government. You can go to African countries, country by country, to detect where is the point that the leadership should be enhanced. That doesn't mean at all to ignore leaders or the leadership in other side or other part of the state. No. In some countries, the global partner, the role of the global partner is bigger than other countries. I don't want people to just continue talking about the French colonization in Africa and the French left, but they are still strong in the countries that they colonized before, and these countries, the role of France is bigger and larger than other countries, and blah, 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 like that. Let us talk about a classification that some countries, the role of the global partner is bigger than other countries. In other countries, the bloc, the regional bloc is strong. Just like ECOWAS, they have good and powerful regional bloc. South Africa, they have strong regional bloc and big brother in the region. In East Africa, you have a successful regional bloc comparatively with other regional blocs. And you have a big brother, and he seems that he's not that older or bigger than others. They look same in East Africa. When you look to Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, you find some economy is bigger, but other the same. Okay, this has something to do with leadership. Political parties, political leaders, professional bureaucrats in some countries, they need to be enhanced, and they need to know the ethics that they make the leadership stronger in dealing with problems and crises. In some countries like Sudan, the community is stronger. Don't waste efforts and money on changeable governments and changeable political parties that they are not stable and they will change to our movement and they come again. So just look at the community, involved with the community. In some countries, if the global partner and the influence of the global partner and the investment of the global partner and the organizations that are promoting for human rights issue and democracy according to the perspective of the their global partner, you should find a way that how to match or how to reach the organizations that they are in charge in changing the community. So from this approach, I want to say that leadership is needed. COVID-19 is a pandemic, is a global crisis and problem, is a big catastrophe. The world after COVID-19 will not be at all the world before COVID-19. I want to add my final point here is that there is no time. Some might think that let us plan now and have rest, waiting for COVID-19 to be over, and then we implement our plans. COVID-19 will not be over. And if COVID-19 is over, other pandemics will follow. And the panic of COVID-19 will follow. So that we should not speak about future. We are in future now, believe me. If any country or any continent, they want to do something, they should do it now, not plan for future and think that this game will end up soon and give us some time to collect our power and to gather our power and to start again. We should start now and we should deal with the reality, not plan for the future. It is something going now. I want to add the final point from my career or field, which is economy. We have data and statistics, and we are writing articles on that the e-commerce now and the delivery services system in Africa is getting stronger than before. Why? Because during the shutdown in at least 13 African countries, the business of e-commerce, buying things online and even selling things online from homes is getting stronger, and people, they start to use several applications, and in some countries they just use this WhatsApp itself or Facebook itself to buy things online and to prepare the money online and all things like that. The delivery system, which didn't existed in some villages and some towns in some countries, existed after COVID-19, and the people in those countries found that they can make a good delivery services system to buy things online and to have it at home, even if you are in a village where there is a shortage of electricity and shortage of water. You just charge the batteries of your mobile and the power banks in your home and get ready, because you need foods and you need for your family, and you need to sell the goods that you produced already to other people so that you cannot wait. I have an article of that, as I said. It will be on my website, which is mekkicenter.com, on what's happening on the issue of e-commerce and e-finance in Africa. But if I'm back to my points, which is state, community, global partner, and the sub-region, the leadership among these four categories are vary from country to country in Africa, and each leadership in each sector needs to be addressed in a different way. And thank you.
One thing I found about the informal sector is that it is an outlawed sector. It was outlawed in the Colonial Ordinance of 1928. And since then, different bylaws of the government have been outlawing the informal sector. And it is treated as not human. It is treated as not part of the economy. It is the economy where people are supposed to subsist while we modernize and bring in multinational corporations. So if we are going to learn any lessons during the COVID-19, is first to ask ourselves, what have we learned about from COVID-19? COVID-19 has taught us that we are all vulnerable, that we are all at risk, that the neoliberal economy that we pride in has been, its fundamentals are on shaky grounds. That's why many people have lost jobs. They don't live beyond one paycheck. Their health insurance is not stable. So what really COVID-19 has revealed is that the neoliberal economy needs rethinking. We need to come up with an economy that is inclusive, an economy that will rely on the human spirit of self-reliance, solidarity, inclusiveness, and equity. And if we look at the informal sector, those are the characteristics that it has. It is based on the human spirit of survival. That's why the people in the informal sector were not seeing it in form of binaries. They were seeing it as a way of life whereby they have to live even if there is COVID-19. And that's why they were saying that they will die if they don't go to the job. But you see, the neoliberal economy, on the other hand, was arguing, was shrinking because of the self-interest of the managers, the self-interest of the owners' capital, who did not want to take any risks further because they feared that if they took any risk, they are going to lose all what they have. The other thing we have to know about the informal sector, if we have learned lessons, is that this is the time to think seriously about everybody in Africa. We have to think, how do we improve our Suame magazine in Ghana so that it can be the mainstream economy? How do we improve the Keko furniture cluster in Tanzania so that it can be part of the economy? How do we improve Owino market in Uganda so that it can be part of the economy instead of it being an outlier, instead of it being regarded as non-human? This is the time that we need to come up with real structural changes that will incorporate everybody. In planning our cities, can we plan our cities whereby we shall have carpenters, whereby we shall have metal workers, whereby we shall have market traders? We have been planning our cities, modeling them in using London, using New York, using China. Can we have our cities planned in a way that we shall have the people who live in dignity and in human spirit? So for me, if we are to think about the informal sector, we have to overhaul our systems and recognize that these are people like everybody else working for corporations, and plan for them, because that is key. And the other thing we have to think about is the way they learn the skills. How do they learn their skills? Most of the skills are learned on the job. How can we document these skills and then teach them in high school, in universities? For example, if you take the Kamukoji place in on Jogoo Road? Can we go out there and document all those skills that they have in making wheelbarrows, in making metal gates, in making boxes, in making all those things? And once we document those skills, we go out and teach them in our schools, in our whatever. We have seen that the matatu sector evolved from informal sector, and today they have what they call ganyas. Can we have such a similar evolution whereby, and we note that the matatu sector does not rely on foreign aid. The matatu sector has evolved on its own. Can we allow it to evolve and live and evolve in a way that it will support itself? So in this case, my argument is that what we need to do is that we start planning for people. We start treating every Kenyan as important. You see, most of the people who end up landing in informal sector are the ones we reject in our school system. Can we have a school system that is inclusive, a school system that will not tell you at age 14 you can no longer go on, or a school system that will tell you that at age 17 you are no longer human, go out there and be an outlier in the economy? So the fundamental issue of addressing the informal economy is through education, through planning, through recognizing that everybody is human, and allowing the informal economy to evolve its own institutions. I remember the other day I saw a video where people were welcoming a new Ganya in Umoja. Can we have a system whereby the informal economy will evolve in its own system and its own line, and one day we shall celebrate an industrialization and an economy based on the informal sector? Thank you.
Fully with them, apart from the fact that I think we have a lot of opportunity to learn on the back of the experience of other countries in implementing solutions that work for us and localizing them accordingly, especially when we're talking about safeguarding livelihoods and injecting money back into the economy. So on that note, I think we definitely need to be bold. We need to be innovative, but we need to also be holistic in our approach, as Meki had shared. When we talk about the informal economy, let me just start by painting a picture of sorts. In 2018, Kenya's informal sector made 83.6% of total employment in the country. In the same period, we also saw formal job creation decrease yet again for a 6th year in a row. As of April of this year, over 4 million young Kenyans are out of jobs. So we know the informal sector is the driver for job creation, not only in Kenya, but in the rest of Africa. So when we really think about the resilience of this space and really think about safeguarding livelihoods, be it through income, be it through social protection, we must talk about the informal sector. This is where jobs are being created. This is where jobs will continue being created. And so when we think about the policies that we have adopted in COVID, it's under the understanding that a lot of the measures that we have taken do not actually apply to the majority. For instance, work from home options do not happen for the majority of people in the informal sector. Your plumber cannot deliver a plumbing service if he's at home. He does not have that luxury to do so in terms of service delivery, but on the end of trying to sell the services or the product to the end buyer, you also don't have access to markets. And so when we're really thinking about the impact of COVID, specifically on the informal sector and on gig platforms, it's with this understanding that shifting business operations are happening, not only in terms of connections to work, but the ability to do those works in a safe manner. And so some of the lessons that we have learned in Link, number one is this ability and the resilience of the informal sector to pivot. If any sector has the ability to change and transform in a very, very difficult period, it is the informal sector. And this is on the back and on the understanding that the informal sector has had to be resilient throughout the course of its history, not having access to, again, things like social protection, not having access to formalization. The sector has always been ready for change and always been the first to do so. And so when we think about the pandemic, it's not only about safeguarding that ability to continue remaining resilient, but making sure that workers have safe opportunities to continue working. Some of the things that we've tried at Link, and this is case in point of a lot of SMEs in this space, is really pivoting our model to adjust accordingly. Whether it's through cash transfer programs, whether it's through sensitization of COVID with our workers, whether it's through distribution of PPE, we found that what works best at this time is, again, creating this safe structure for informal workers to operate. I'll give you an instance. So we have a production facility in Babadogo in which we produce all of our furniture in. In this facility, we have about 40 carpenters that report to the facility Monday through Sunday. They have access to tools and equipment. They have access to mentorship. They have access to training. They have access to PPE. It's a very controlled and safe environment, meaning that the worker can still come to work, even as an informal worker. They can still continue to deliver their services without even having to engage with the end client. So really this ability to make sure that the environment that the worker is working in is safe. The other point that I would say before closing up is really making sure that informal sector workers have the opportunity to continue operating in this very difficult business time. This means offsetting the cost of operations as a result of the increase in business doings. Yeah, so the increased cost of not only transportation, the increased cost of buying tools and materials, the increased cost of the actual services themselves, really making sure that we're bridging the gap that informal sector workers have to think about in this period of time, not only when customers are unlikely to spend, but also thinking through this sector, knowing that not all workers in this space are providing essential services. Yeah, and so your beautician may not be an essential service worker, but the services that are being delivered by them are essential to them in terms of their income. So really thinking about how to reshape the way we are doing work. So my opinion on this is not very positive, and I'll say why. I believe when we are talking about this sector, a lot of the measures that we've taken, at least as they come into play with legislation, do not take into consideration the majority. And so when we are thinking about whether it is the tax law, whether it is the popularly known Sakaja bill, I really don't think that these are looking at the holistic sense of the way this pandemic has affected informal sector workers. Yeah, and so when you're talking about cutting taxes for Kenyans earning more than 24,000 shillings, that's not majority of Kenyans. And so really when we think about legislation and governments really enforcing systems and measures for informal workers to operate, it needs to take into consideration that majority of Kenyans and majority of Africans are actually wage workers. Yeah, so saying things like unpaid leave, furloughing, tax cuts, these are not going to cut it. Yeah, really making sure that when we are talking about informal sector workers, we are really thinking about social protection, the ability to continue doing work in a safe way. Yeah, if you are a workshop on Gong Road, you cannot continue operating safely if your neighbors are not operating safely. Yeah, so as much as you cannot social distance, also if you don't have access to critical services, how can you continue doing that work? You're already not paying taxes, you're already not in the system. So really thinking about how can you as a government help me as a worker continue delivering these services, number one, in a safe way. But given that majority of my services have now been deprioritized as non-essential, how am I going to access these markets? I can no longer speak to my clients and try to get them to buy my goods or services. How can I access additional markets? Whether these markets are on gig platforms, whether these markets are overseas, how can I make sure that I am continuing to be able to sell these services if I don't have a platform and avenue to do so? And so when I think about the measures the government needs to take, it's with this understanding that majority of people do not have these, the measures that are in place do not affect the majority of people that are wage workers.
When you inquire about the challenges of capitalism, indeed, as a premise, I'm very inclined to what Dr. Kinyanjui was saying. And I always situate neoliberalism in the context of what we call the policies of the Bretton Woods institutions. And you do know that these policies, this is the IMF and the World Bank, have done a lot of damage to the developing world. And I will just give you a practical example. These policies, I think most of them were introduced in the 80s and the 90s. And if you look at them, some of them were the things so-called structural adjustment programs. And these policies, their effect was that the industries that were budding, that were actually growing, then died when we liberalized our economy. Kikomi in Kisumu is a good example. We have Rivertex. We do not have Pan Paper today. We have a lot of sugar companies going under. So it simply means that we opened our markets for more sophisticated goods to compete in the international market when we were hardly able to compete, because it simply means the products we produced would have needed time to mature in terms of skill and value addition before then we could open our markets and compete. And so what that has done is that we have been intense on agriculture. And agriculture, as you know, is subject to the law of diminishing returns. And so it means it doesn't matter how much cut flour we import. When somebody exports a car into Kenya, they automatically make money. The nature of capital is very important. When you use your capital to develop high value goods, call them spare parts, call them medicine, call them machinery, and somebody then all they have is land as capital, then that disconnect means going forward, you will not be able to compete. And the other fact then is these policies become barriers in the path of these individuals, so that neoliberalism then does not serve the interests of the developing world. And so I think in as far as capitalism is concerned, whereas it is a model that we get from the West, I think there is need for internal reflection in order to come up with endogenous solutions to our unique challenges. Otherwise, if we patch ourselves into the international system as we are, then I think we are like lambs to the slaughter. And really then at an economic level, we cannot extricate ourselves. The government might try, but unless and until then we have our informal sectors using their labor to produce things that can be consumed, the so-called buy Kenya, build Kenya, I don't think we are going to make impact, because somebody has made the argument that what sets one country from another in terms of the poverty index is that most rich countries then have capacity to produce in terms of industries. They have industries, but if you inquire in our country today, we barely just manufacture foods, and I don't think we can boast heavy industries as other countries can do. And that I think makes a difference, because if you have a waiter in New York, that waiter will of course make more money than a waiter in Kenya. So it doesn't matter how efficient the waiter in Kenya works. I mean, the individual in New York, because of the dynamics of how capital is interpreted and applied, that gives them an edge. And that then is a case for internal reflection and interrogation. When then we inquire into legal solutions to address pandemics, I'm sorry on this, I would say there is no silver bullet, because the world is fairly interconnected. And I think the legal avenues that we have are avenues in immigration, so that, for example, we would have stringent screening procedures, as you have seen. the government has come up with ad hoc procedures so that you, for example, need a COVID-free certificate. You, for example, need a certain kind of screening. Countries have been classified in terms of high-risk countries, medium risk, and low-risk countries. But in the short run, I don't see us coming with an international legal framework that then, as some people have attempted to say, would assign responsibility to China and ask China to pay damages to other countries. I mean, that, in my thinking, is a long shot. And so what we would do is we would tweak internal structures, because also the way law works in an international setting is different with how it works in a domestic setting. In a domestic setting, we can easily make and enforce laws. Lawmaking at the international level is a product of consensus and a lot of horse trading. And in order to get consensus on certain controversial things, of course, will mean you have to take time. You have to use carrots where applicable and fewer sticks, depending on how contentious the measures you want to drive are. So that would be my thinking. Thank you. Still with the scheme of the kind of capital, then these developed countries can command in relation to what we can do. So I think what the government would have done is maybe adopted economy-wide policies. But the other challenge of that is that it would still have an impact on the private sector. Because I think in Germany, for example, I heard of a decision by the Federal Republic of Germany to suspend rents so that they would be backdated. And as a matter of law, so that a certain cadre of economic players would be able to benefit. And I think it is at that point that Adidas attracted a lot of flack when it also purported to benefit from such arrangement. Because you can imagine where you have a chain like Java, which of course then, whether it is indigenous or not, that's another question. But then if you have a cross-cutting policy, where then you agree as government in the same spirit that we had 5% tax relief, that for a certain time, allow these individuals to operate and try to backdate their responsibilities so that once things are up and running, then they could have a framework to gradually maybe defray the expenses they have incurred. That would be a model, but a model where then the government injects money into private entities, that would be a bit controversial. And this is not a first. We remember the case of Nakumat, when Nakumat was going down. And the argument was Nakumat is too big to fail. And so what will the government do in view of the fact that then a lot of jobs were at stake, because this was a chain that was the biggest in the country, and I mean, it had branches everywhere. What would happen to those Kenyan workers? But the government was not very keen to go that way. And so I think our dynamics are not really inclined in the direction where we would be going and bailing out these private entities. I have seen the government give in a bit, particularly in the education sector, where the argument was made that there are teachers who have been employed by Board of Governors, and we know conventionally those are not TSC teachers. But then the government, I think, ceded ground and said, we will take that, we will pick that tab and make sure that they are well taken care of. So really, for me, it is a mix, but I'm not sure the government has the economic wherewithal to do that across the board. So that practice might result in discrimination, but they would tailor-make policies that then ease the burden of the pandemic across businesses.
My opinion on this is not very positive, and I'll say why. I believe when we are talking about this sector, a lot of the measures that we have taken, at least as they come into play with legislation, do not take into consideration the majority. And so when we are thinking about whether it is the tax law, whether it is the popularly known Sakaja bill, I really don't think that these are looking at the holistic sense of the way this pandemic has affected informal sector workers. Yeah, and so when you're talking about cutting taxes for Kenyans earning more than 24,000 shillings, that's not majority of Kenyans. And so really when we think about legislation and governments really enforcing systems and measures for informal workers to operate, it needs to take into consideration that majority of Kenyans and majority of Africans are actually wage workers. Yeah, so saying things like unpaid leave, furloughing, tax cuts, these are not going to cut it. Yeah, really making sure that when we are talking about informal sector workers, we are really thinking about social protection, the ability to continue doing work in a safe way. Yeah, if you are a workshop on Gong Road, you cannot continue operating safely if your neighbors are not operating safely. Yeah, so as much as you cannot social distance, also if you don't have access to critical services, how can you continue doing that work? You're already not paying taxes, you're already not in the system. So really thinking about how can you as a government help me as a worker continue delivering these services, number one, in a safe way. But given that majority of my services have now been deprioritized as non-essential, how am I going to access these markets? I can no longer speak to my clients and try to get them to buy my goods or services. How can I access additional markets? Whether these markets are on gig platforms, whether these markets are overseas, how can I make sure that I am continuing to be able to sell these services if I don't have a platform and avenue to do so? And so when I think about the measures the government needs to take, it's with this understanding that majority of people do not have these, the measures that are in place do not affect majority of people that are wage workers.
Increasingly now the government is moving towards something called green procurement. And green procurement, as we know, the government is the biggest buyer of commodities in the country. And so the argument under green procurement has been, in order to address climate change, what we need to do is to encourage government to buy green. And since it is the biggest buyer, it means it will buy fuel efficient vehicles, it will buy green printers, it will procure paper from sources that are green, it will procure not incandescent light bulbs, but energy saving bulbs. So if it does this across the ministries, across the diverse departments, then it creates a change. Okay. And so I am in agreement that then in the same scheme, we would empower our people. We would bring the mantra, buy Kenya, build Kenya, and the person who would be championing and implementing that mantra would be none other than the government. So I'm in complete agreement with the example I've given.
I have seen here in America the debates between the Republican and the Democrats as far as the stimulus package is concerned. The Congress brings its own plan and the Republicans bring their own plan, where they debate and agree and disagree on what we get the stimulus for. But you note that our governments have a big problem. Most of their development money comes from outside financiers. And most of those outside financiers will determine it is going to be used and how it is going to be spent. So in this case, if the World Bank is not giving out money for stimulus packages, then you don't expect our government to have a program. And this is why I'm saying, as African governments, we need to sit back, take stock of what we have been doing in the past, reevaluate our methods, reevaluate our philosophies, reevaluate our thinking, reevaluate our values, because we need to come up with workable projects where we shall develop our countries for the sake of citizens, not because foreigners are coming. For example, what is the logic of developing the express highway from the airport to Westlands when a few miles Odero you cannot access anywhere in Odero, Kangemi, on when it rains? What is the logic of developing an express highway when in Kinangop you cannot move milk from the farm? What is the logic? You cannot move sugarcane in Kakamega. You cannot move fish from the landing base to Kisumu market. What is the logic? You can not move cattle from northeastern to markets in Nairobi. So for me, I think if you can tell the government, they need to come back and go back to the drawing board and come up with a sessional paper, like sessional paper number 10 of 1965, and say, what are we planning for our citizens? What do we want our country to be? Is it to develop the country so that we can be saying we are like Europe or North America? Or is it to develop the country to make sure that everybody has food on the table, everybody can access school, everybody can access Medicare, and everybody can move the way they want to move? Because as it stands now, Uhuru and the opposition, they are only interested in safeguarding their businesses. They are not interested in safeguarding anybody else's businesses. They are looking at their banks, how much they are going to lose if businesses collapse. They are looking at their real estate businesses. They are looking at all this. That's why they cannot come up with the policies. And I think this is the high time that people with the like-minded people should come up and say, let's come with a sessional paper for post-COVID economy. And this paper should be based on planning for the people, by the people, and for the people. And this will mean healthcare, jobs, good education, food, leisure, and all that is needed. It doesn't make sense to catch up with development. What makes sense is to plan for development for the people you are leading. And that should be the message for everybody, that we need a sessional paper for post-COVID and the lessons learned, and we do structural change in the economy.
I think one of the things that we have to be very realistic about is what structures exist for us to buy and build Kenya. When we talk, for instance, about the 8 stimulus package plan and, manufacturing 250,000 desks by local manufacturers, who are these local manufacturers? I would like to know. I would like to know as somebody who's working in the furniture space. Yeah, because we don't have capacity in-house for us to locally produce those desks. And even if we were to engage informal worker shops to create those desks, there is no one conglomerate that can bring together these informal worker shops and actually make these desks. And so I think it's very, very important as we continue to talk about buying Kenya and building Kenya, we speak of it in context of the structures and their lack of that exist in this space. In order for us to meaningfully create value-added services, in order for us to meaningfully manufacture at scale, we actually need to have the systems in place, and we need to have organization and formalization of the sector to enable these young entrepreneurs and these businesses to be able to meaningfully contribute in the way that we are envisioning. Yeah, I think it's quite unrealistic for us to expect buy and build Kenya in this example, for instance, when a lot of these workshops don't have access to the high equipment, machinery, and tools that would be required for them to manufacture these desks. And even on the end of manufacturing, forget productivity alone and tools and materials, but when we're thinking of raw inputs into the system and across the value chain, especially when we're talking about furniture, you're talking about the fact that we have to import a lot of our timber from outside of Kenya, number one. But number two, we don't have the ability to dry our own wood or to mill it. Yeah, and so when we're talking about manufacturing and building Kenya, we must take into consideration the full value chain and ensure that we are building the systems to enable us to manufacture locally.
On the side of the informal sector, we would have loved to see governments or authorities trying to as much as possible involve us and consulting with us to find out exactly how we are doing and the effects of the virus to the growth of our businesses. Incidentally, we've heard from our neighbors, that is in Kenya, how the president and the authorities try to mitigate from start up this juncture. And we've heard from our neighbors in Tanzania as well as Rwanda how they have tried to mitigate. However, on the side of Uganda, we really feel like not much has been done, which has led to see a backslide of the economy, especially since most of the participants are from the private sector. More so when we are focusing on the current trend of political atmosphere, whereby we are we are going through the early sessions of politicization or of campaigning in regard to next year's general elections. This also has brought in a negative impact on the economy since and the private sector's participation, since we are the most affected. And this case, since we haven't been much involved in seeing or trying to see mitigative measures being taken by governments and authorities to help us go through the current trend of issues. That is, when we are approaching, we cannot say we are approaching the end of COVID. When we are focusing on the increased, I'll call it fear, because for the first 3 months we didn't get any death, but currently so far we are looking at more than 10 people dead. In fact, we are approaching 20 people dead, and 318 positive cases in one day. We have, if we look at, if we go ahead and try to focus on trend of things, how it had been happening. We had several of our membership complaining about their goods being transferred from Mombasa to Naivasha, which we appreciate and understand. However, with a little or nothing done to see to it that, since this was a first lockdown, we would have expected governments to at least consult each other and agree on the best way forward with a blanket waiver for all the charges involved in order to enable us surviving business after or post-COVID or after the lockdown, as we focus on post-COVID economic recovery. When you say a mitigative measure is about stopping importation and focusing on local production, which local production does not have any government input, apart from instructing or directing or coming up with measures or policies that does not favor the participants, then we feel like it's more of politicization than the real activism we would have expected. We need to be more proactive other than reactive. That is being reactionary. Yes, the president talked about it, but there are certain issues that need to be attended to, and these attendant issues should have been done through consultation and find out exactly what, as private sector, we need in order to go through this. Many of our private sector has gone through gradual ascension or descension, depending on either way you have gone into from importation to local production. And we cannot say we just run away from importation as such. It's never like that. We can put up measures that can favor local production and focus on that. Encourage importers and other participants to go through that trend in order to holistically grow as local producers, other than with one supporting the other. That is, if I'm been importing and I intend to go to start a value addition or go through that chain, I would expect one, government to educate the people how best it can be done. Two, to put up supporting institutions, say facilitate local banks that can really spur the growth of local production. Three, you can add or you can put certain measures that can discourage me from importing, other than saying we are stopping importation and going into local production with immediate effect, which is totally does not favor growth of an economy. All economies, even Chinese, are still importing. Europeans are still importing. We are importing as much as Kenya is importing from Uganda, but you are not putting up such a measures. So we are saying the best would have been, we have seen Kenyans giving subsidies to farmers. We have been hearing Tanzanians doing the same. That is what we would have expected our government to do, not coming out of the blue and request the East African, the regional participants or regional states to allow you to increase the customs union valuation, that is import duty, from 25 to 35, especially on the side of textiles, or $5 per kilogram, whichever is higher. Would have expected you as government to sit with us, consult with us. We give our views for the best of the economies, not only Ugandans, but also the other regional players. Because this is not, it shouldn't have been a unilateral decision. It would have been a holistic and a general decision taken by the five states or partner states of East African community.
Just before COVID-19 happened, the economy, at least in Kenya, was quite tough for construction. I know several companies that had already, perhaps 6 months before COVID happened, had gone into lean models to have either some people laid off, only essential staff being left around, or completely closed business because for some reason, government of Kenya policies and varied challenges really had effects on the whole industry. And then coronavirus arrived and it was really bad. Before COVID, our company had 130 full-time and clients pulling out of projects, and a very, very tough situation, had to lay off 100%. But also it rehired under very new terms. And for me, I find that the terms we are trying to keep everything for different arrangements. So different people engage as in specific businesses to be able to deliver on the specific services they were delivering on previously, but with kind of time-bound specific arrangements so that in case projects or clients were not able to take care of certain projects, then it was time-bound and it was trying to keep everyone going, but not everyone going down the drain, really. I remember many years ago reading on this idea of future of work. And well, there are many ideas around it, but one important part of it was that remote work possibilities were going to be needed in the future. And at least for construction, well, it is part formal, part informal sector. The informal sector is not really able to work remotely because you have to go to a job site and actually execute on specific work. We have different projects projects all over Kenya, a couple of them in Uganda and different African countries. And well, all have been affected. We've had to obviously let go some of them because we cannot monitor in terms of quality and presence specific projects, especially those other local partners that we work with. And I think for partnerships and relationships between different entities in the industry to be able to execute on the same ideas. There's a very important part also, I think strongly at least, that has helped our company is this idea of diversifying income. So because construction doesn't seem to be going very well now and perhaps for the next 1 year, depending on how things turn out, there are different models now. So of course, manufacturing, not for construction, but for machinery, because we have a very fantastic team of engineers, for example, that now are into processing of different specific items. And let's see how the market could receive them. But specifically for infrastructure for Africa, which is a very broad space, I obviously cannot exhaust it absolutely. But I think obviously there is a slowdown in different executions, but I think it's a very important industry for the whole continent, and to be able to do it everything well, we do a lot of procurement from all over the world, really. We need to look at local possibilities for procurement of several materials. Instead of buying heavily from China, we could buy and see how local mechanisms can be put together. Thank you. My time is up.
I want to see this opportunity to call again for Great East Africa, which is East Africa Community plus IGAD. I hope this to happen one day because this region has a lot of similarities and potentials. You have the oil in South Sudan, you have the oil in North Sudan, you have big population in Ethiopia with very big potentials, and this area could connect East Africa community with the rest of the Asian side of Arab community, where the wealth and the capitals. So I'm one of the advocates of regional blocks, REX, and one of the advocates of Greater East Africa Community. I say always regional blocks are successful. Why? Because they are connected with reality. Because region is reality and economy is reality. But when you go to Pan-Africanism and larger concept of African unity, it could be better as a political slogans and source of inspiration and political literature and culture, more than something on the ground. So I have more things to say and to add, but I spare that for another time, another conference. And thank you for the organizers of the conference, and thank you for my brother.